Hello, personal finance. Gotcha. We're not done with chapter 10 yet. Sorry, totally forgot. There is one last part, and it's a short one, but this is all about buying a car. So, the good thing is, this is another thing that's going to really concern you over the next, say within, 3 to 5, 7 years, depending whether you need a car when you go to school or not. But you're going to be buying a car eventually in your life. And let's learn a little bit about how that works. And there's different ways that you can get a car. There's different loan durations and just things to understand when you're purchasing a vehicle. So, what are our objectives for part four, all about financing a car? So, first question: what is the typical duration of a car loan? Meaning, about how long will lenders let you borrow money for the purpose of buying a car? Number two, what are the implications of having a shorter versus a longer car loan? We're going to learn all about the differences between the two, advantages, disadvantages. And third, what is leasing a car? Another way you can get a car is to lease it. What are the pros and cons of leasing versus buying a car? So let's get right into it. This is going to be a short one. Okay, so financing your car. So the typical duration of a car loan is from 3 to 6 years. I have heard of dealerships going up to 7. I think I've even heard of 8-year loans. Never, don't do it. I would not recommend going over 5, but that's how long lenders are willing to give you. So there are advantages and disadvantages to having shorter versus longer loan durations. So let's get into what they are. So as we've talked about before, having a shorter loan period for any amount that you borrow means a few things. First of all, it means having higher payments. You're going to owe more money per month, every month, for the duration of that loan, as opposed to a longer loan, which means you pay less over a longer amount of time. So, good or bad, depends on your situation, but that's what having a shorter loan means. You're having higher payments, you're going to pay back more each month. Less total interest paid over the life of the loan. So with a shorter loan period, that means that whatever percentage your interest rate is going to compound many fewer times over a shorter loan amount, over a shorter loan duration, sorry. And finally, you have a much better chance of building equity if you have a shorter loan period. So that means the faster you pay it back, you do. You will owe less on the vehicle than it's worth. So what you own and what you owe, you'll have that equity. And then conversely, let's talk about longer loan periods. So of course, a longer loan period is first of all going to mean that you have lower payments, and that can be very enticing. I've done it. I took out the longest loan I possibly could when I bought my first car, thinking that was the best thing for me. At the time, maybe it was. It got me lower payments. Was it the best thing for my long-term financial success? No, it was not. If you have a longer loan period, it means you're going to pay more interest over the life of that loan because, again, that interest rate is going to be compounding more often. It compounds and you owe a little bit more each month the longer that you have that loan. So you will pay more for whatever you buy if you buy it for a longer period of time. And finally, we've talked about this. You have the potential to be upside down, which means you don't have equity. You have negative equity. So what you owe is up here and the value of your assets down here. So you owe. Not a good situation to be in. That means if something happens to the vehicle, and let's say you get into a car accident and it gets totaled, your insurance company is only going to pay for what the vehicle is worth, not what you owe. So then you're not going to have a vehicle, and you are going to owe money to the bank still. Not a good situation. And also, if you decide you want to trade that car in, you're going to trade it in, and then you're going to pay, one, the value of the vehicle, the new vehicle that you're buying, plus that amount that is in excess of what you owe on that vehicle. Or I think I explained that right. The difference between what you owe and what you own. So that negative amount, so if you owe $2,000 more than your car is worth, You're going to tack that right into your next car payment. That has also happened to me. It sucks. Don't get yourself in that situation. So that's shorter versus longer loan periods. Let's talk about used car loans. I would recommend buying a used car, good used car from a reputable dealer to anybody. It's funny. I used to say I would never buy a new car again, but I was speaking for myself only. My wife bought a brand new car last summer. So best intentions, right? I just find that the depreciation of a new car, that the immediate depreciation means that it instantly goes down in value and it's not worth it. We did get a really, really good deal on a new car. So I was able to swallow it. So used car loans are different than new car loans. They're typically only available for shorter periods. You're typically not going to find a used car loan that's, 6, 7 years, anything like that, which is good because it doesn't allow you to get into trouble, because the banks know that it's all too likely that the vehicle's not going to last 6, 7, 8 years. So they know they don't want you to get in the situation where you owe more on it than it's worth, because then that increases their risk and the likelihood of people, being able to pay for that loan that they took out, because the vehicle is not worth it. So typically they're only available for shorter periods, typically from 2, maybe 3 years. You can get them longer depending on how old the car is. If it's a relatively new, if it's only 1 year old, you might be able to get a full 5-year loan. But generally, the loan durations are much shorter for used cars. So all lenders have their own requirements for the age and value of the vehicle. It's one way to look at it is it's also kind of another insurance policy to make sure you're not getting screwed over, because your lender is going to say, okay, if you want to take out this loan, here's all the information we need. What's the year? What's the mileage? What's the vehicle history? So they can tell if you're overpaying. They're going to look at what that vehicle is worth versus what you're paying, and they will deny you any sort of financing if you're paying more than it's worth. They'll just decline it, and you won't be able to borrow the money. So actually, back to that point, and a lot of lenders only have specific criteria that they will allow. Like, a lot of lenders won't get into like the classic car. You can't borrow $30,000 to buy an old classic car. It's not the market they're in. They don't understand the value. They don't get into the market, and that's a specialty area. So they won't even let that happen either. There's certain sort of criteria that it has to fit, and it's really all up to the lender. So, if you're in the classic car, if you're looking for an old classic car like old Camaro, something like that, you have to go to certain lenders who specialize in those types of loans. And there are typically fewer lenders. And it's typically higher rates as well, because with used cars, there is more risk involved, because the type of, generally speaking, and this is again over hundreds of thousands of auto loans, the people who there's a higher likelihood that someone with bad credit, less money, and lower credit scores are going to shop for cheaper used cars because they don't have the assets to buy new cars. So that increases the risk to lenders. So typically the rates are going to be a bit higher. All right, now let's talk about leasing versus buying. So how to think of a lease. A lease is basically a long-term rental agreement. Like, you might have gone on vacation with your parents, and you've got, at the airport, you got a rental car for a week. Leasing a car is basically renting a car for a long period of time. You do not own the car. You will never own the car during that lease period. You're borrowing it from someone else, and you have to follow the terms of that lease. So there are advantages and disadvantages. The first, an advantage is there's typically lower car payments. So one thing a lot of people do is they'll get, really nice luxury cars, and you will pay way less to lease a luxury car than you would if you bought it outright and just had regular payments. There can be small or zero down payment. So that is another advantage. They don't typically require a big down payment, but there are reasons for that. At the end of your lease period, you just bring the car back, sign it back to them, and walk away. As long as you follow the rules, there are typically, and I think we'll get to this, but there are rules you have to follow when you're leasing a vehicle. You can't, by any means, do whatever you want. Another good thing is when you lease a vehicle, you typically aren't responsible for any maintenance costs. You don't own the vehicle. In fact, they put you on a schedule and say, okay, at the end of either at 2,000 miles or 3 months, we want you to come back in here. We're going to change the oil and we're going to go over the whole vehicle and make sure everything's good. And then you'll do that again at 6,000, 9,000, 12,000. And you're not responsible for it. You drop it off, they do all the work, and they give it back to you. And of course, the reason they do that is it's their car. They want to make sure that it's being taken care of. You have to bring it in. All right, so what are the disadvantages? First and foremost, the number one disadvantage is it is more expensive than buying a car. And I know I said that there are lower payments. However, you're never going to build equity in that car. From a pure investment perspective, it's not good because you're basically just paying for the car. You're never going to gain any sort of equity in it. And then you're just paying that long-term lease, and then you are giving it back to them. So you're giving the vehicle back, and you've already paid for, whatever per month for 1, 2, 3 years, and then you're left with nothing at the end. Financially speaking, it is more expensive to lease a car than buying a car. Another major disadvantage, you don't own it. It is not yours. And that means you can't do things like modify it. A lot of people like to do things like, put a cool exhaust system on it or anything like that. You cannot modify the car. It is not yours. You cannot do anything to it. As I already mentioned, when you're leasing a car, you can't sell it. You can't just say, oh, you know what? I'm going to take this Audi that I'm leasing and you know what? I'm going to sell it to someone else. Doesn't work that way. You don't own it, so you can't sell it, right? Makes sense. And you return it, you have nothing. You have to lease a new car or buy a new car or a used car, whatever you want to do. You must adhere to the dealer maintenance schedule very, very strictly. They will hunt you down and find you if you're not taking care of that vehicle. If you're not bringing it in to the dealership, every 3,000 miles or every 2 months, you're required to do. You're technically breaking your lease if you don't have the car taken care of, and they can take it back. There are also, and this is a major one, there are limits on mileage. You can't just say, oh, you know what? I drive a ton, so I'm just going to lease a car and just put all this crap ton of miles on it, and then I'll give it back to them, and it's their problem. Again, not the way it works. It's typically between 10 and 15,000 miles a year that you can drive, which is, I would say, average to below average for what people do. Like, for example, if you drive for a living, it would be really not smart to say, I'm going to lease a car and be an Uber driver. Not smart at all. You're going to pay a lot. If you go over those limits on your mileage, you have to pay per mile. It varies what the charge is, but you will owe a lot of money if you go over that annual limit on mileage. Yep. If you exceed it, you owe the dealer money. So when you go and bring it back in at the end of your lease, and it's a 3-year lease and you're only allowed to have 40,000 miles on it, if you have any more, they charge you per mile. There's also, just like anything, you go to a car dealership, there are ways they can screw you to buy a new car, to buy a used car. There's ways they can screw you when you're leasing a car too. There's lots of potential for hidden fees. Everything's negotiable. You can negotiate your mileage limit up if you think you're going to need to. You can negotiate down to 0 down payment. There's always room for negotiation there. But there is the potential for hidden fees. And a lot of people have gotten caught there and have complained about it. So be careful. Understand what you're reading. Look for any fees that are in the fine print, and negotiate it. Don't pay them. All right. And we'll get to these. I believe one of these is a, God, I always forget the guy's name. But a video of an explanation of, there's a lot of confusion, I would say, about leasing. Some people think it's the most evil thing in the world. Some people think it's great. Oh, it's a depreciating asset, so you should never buy a depreciating asset. You should lease it. I don't think that's true. And I'll put a link to this video and you can check it out. All right, so that wraps up chapter 10 officially this time. I promise. All right, no more part 5 surprise. That's it for chapter 10. So let's review. What's the typical duration of a new car loan versus a used car loan? Secondly, what are the implications of having a shorter versus a longer car loan? What are the advantages and disadvantages of both? And finally, what does it mean to lease a car? And what are the pros and cons of leasing versus buying a car? And I will say, for some people, it does make sense to lease a car. People who have zero mechanical knowledge whatsoever and really just want to have a new car all the time. Sure, it works. Financially, it's more expensive, but for some, it makes more sense. If it's what they want, it's not for me. I've never leased a car and I never will. Well, just like I'll never buy a new car, I guess. I guess I'll hold out on that one, but it's certainly not in my short or long-term plans to ever lease a car. And that sums up chapter 10, again, for real this time. Go through this, submit it, keep an eye on Classroom. If you have any questions, reach out to me. And hopefully I'll talk to you guys on Friday afternoon's call. All right. Thanks, guys. Bye.